Good evening, friends. Um, Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Sri Harsha, again for uh, allowing me to speak to you all about coblation. So, in the first session, me and Dr. Vidyasagar spoke about different kind of applications of coblation in terms of its laryngeal applications, and Sagar spoke to you all about it was a potpourri that he spoke to you about different applications of coblation. This time, today, this evening, we are going to contain ourselves to two very important applications of coblation and what coblation came to be known for. One is its application in the management of obstructive sleep apnea, and the second one in the application of coblation in larynx. So I've decided to talk to you all about the laryngeal applications, and Sagar is going to talk to you all about its applications on sleep apnea. But if I remember very clearly, last time I spoke to you all about giving you the indications and settings of each of these of the laryngeal wands, the different wands that are available, its settings that need to be done. So while I'm doing this presentation, I'm going to take you through the different settings of all the laryngeal wands that are available. Of course, there are two laryngeal wands. And Dr. Vidyasagar is going to talk to you about the other laryngeal wands the other wands, plasma wands that are used in the management of sleep apnea. And whatever he's not covered, I will take up again later. And at the end of it, I'm going to give you a PDF chart with all the wands that are available from Smith & Nephew for coblation, the recommended settings, and the recommended suction that you need to put in, that you can download, or I'll be very happy to share the entire PDF with Sri Harsha, and you can collect it from him. So dear colleagues, again, thank you very much for joining us this beautiful evening in Hyderabad. We're having a good rain outside. So, of course, the COVID cases have also increased. There is a shower of COVID cases, but let's put that to the side and let's focus on the laryngeal applications of coblation. Now, before we go in and talk about the laryngeal applications, I think it's very important for us to meet the laryngeal wands. There are two laryngeal wands by the Smith & Nephew company, which is the original makers of coblation. The first laryngeal wand, and my favorite, is the Coblation ProSize MLW wand, standing for microlaryngeal wand. Now the settings for this are 7 and 3. And if you look at this tiny little graph here, its depth in microns and the penetration based on the default coblation setting, which is 5 and 3. And if you can go maximum, you can go to 7 and 3. But if you look at the default coagulation setting, look at the depth that is going in terms of the depth of thermal effect. So ideally, because larynx is a very, very fragile structure, and you all know the superficial lamina propria, the epithelium is very fragile. So I would strongly suggest that you would basically stick to coblation only and don't resort to coag. Coag is basically a bipolar setting wherein there is no difference between a regular bipolar application and using the blue pedal when you use the coag setting in your coblation device. Now, the next wand that you should also know is the laryngeal wand. Now, the laryngeal wand and the MLW wand both are about 19 centimeters. This is a ProSize wand, okay? Both are called ProSize. The one earlier is got a single electrode, whereas here it's got a pad. Now the diameter of this laryngeal wand is about 3.8 millimeters, about 4. And the way this is designed is for the plasma to form here. The saline comes out from here and it falls on this active electrode here. This is made of ceramic. So this is not a good conductor of electricity. So here is where the plasma is formed, and the mechanism of action of both of these wands are very different. When you use a laryngeal wand, the action should be more like dabbing, okay, like how you dab your mop. Whereas when you use the MLW wand, it's more of dissecting, because this is the active electrode. Let's start with the application of the LW wand in supraglottis. Before I go in and explain these things, I will take you through what is supraglottic stenosis, wherein I would see the application of a gentle device like coblation has huge applications on. So I will talk to you initially about supraglottic stenosis. I mean, literature is so scarce on supraglottic stenosis. The highest number comes from Kishore Sandhu's group from Lausanne, and that too in the pediatric age group. The highest number is 14. Here I would present a few of our cases, and we are writing our experience up in the application of coblation in supraglottic stenosis management. After supraglottic stenosis, I would talk to you also about other lesions and also its applications in the neonatal age group. Now, what is supraglottic stenosis? What you see here in the image is supraglottic stenosis, dear friends. Supraglottic stenosis is a circumferential contractile scarring in the supraglottic area. It involves the aryepiglottic folds, it involves the arytenoids, it involves the epiglottis and the interarytenoid region. So when so many things in the supraglottis are involved, it becomes a supraglottic stenosis. And thankfully, compared to subglottic and tracheal stenosis, supraglottic stenosis is fairly uncommon, and we should be thanking our stars for that. Even though it's common in the pediatric age group, post-intubation and following laryngeal surgery, especially laryngeal surgery for congenital laryngomalacia or laryngeal lesions. In adults, which I will be talking to you about initially, it's most commonly found after laryngotracheal trauma, caustic ingestion, which is most common in India, after radiation, post-surgical, and also in autoimmune diseases. And that is where most of your pre-op workup is, especially in vaginas, in sarcoid, in SLE, in bullous pemphigoid, and relapsing polychondritis. Now, the first case I will talk to you about is a brilliant girl who's a 15-year-old girl, a daughter of an IAS officer, consumed caustic agent. Do you know why she did that? Because she got only 80% in her 10th standard and didn't get 90%. This 15-year-old had consumed some caustic agent and initially presented to wherever she presented with breathlessness and choking spells. An emergency tracheostomy was performed on her and a feeding gastrostomy was performed on her. Now, when we talk about any supraglottic stenosis, when you go about tackling these patients, an FLP, which stands for flexible laryngopharyngoscopy, is very important. A CT with contrast is very important. Now, why is that important? Because you need to gauge the thickness of the stenotic segment. because it's just not only the extent, now the diameter of the supraglottic stenosis that's important, it's also very important that you understand the thickness. You need to take a biopsy as well. Now, why do you need to take a biopsy? Because these lesions can be secondary to conditions like pemphigoid, can be secondary to conditions like amyloidosis, can be secondary to sarcoid, and that's why you need to take biopsy. And hence, similarly, you need to do an ANCA to rule out all kinds of autoimmune conditions. ANA, ANCA to rule out ANA for sarcoid, ANCA for Wegener's, and angiotensin converting enzyme for sarcoids. Now, I'm going to play the video, and I'm going to, because for paucity in time, I'm going to quickly skip through different parts of the video. The video is through the story of right from her initial assessment. So this is how she presented. Okay, quickly, that's the base of the tongue. These are the posterior pharyngeal, this is the posterior pharyngeal wall, posterior pillars, and all you could see is just a thick web. And fortunately for her, because whenever the people, they intervened, they did a tracheostomy. So here you see I'm using a MLW wand. The wand, the video is playing into 2, so it's going very fast, but I was very gentle. So the fantastic part about this MLW wand is when you put it at a setting of 7 and 3, it's a very gentle device, and you can see there is absolutely no charring whatsoever. Everything is white. Everything is white, and you can assess how thick this stenotic segment is. Now you can see the laryngeal inlet. This entire thing is the supraglottic stenotic part. I've briefly switched to the EVAC 70 wand, and once I basically see what is going on here, when I look at so you can basically see how we are creating the larynx or the laryngeal inlet from this huge scar that is there. Now I'm back with the MLW wand, and here I'm trying to create the piriform fossa. This is the arytenoid. This is the aryepiglottic fold, and slowly I'm using a laryngeal spreader. See, all this are just fibrous bands, and then slowly we're trying to sculpt the entire larynx out of the scar that is there. So this is the epiglottis. This is the right piriform fossa. This is the left piriform fossa. So 2 things, the larynx, actually, the MLW can cut, can coagulate, can put in saline there, wash in that area. So as I'm putting the laryngeal spreader, vocal cord spreader, we are slowly putting in the spreader, putting traction, and now slowly with the MLW wand, you can see how precisely this wand can cut layer by layer, layer by layer. And there is nowhere that you can see charring. Now, then I will cut to the supraglottic, suprastomal area. Now, let me pause here. Now, this is the suprastomal granuloma that was there for this patient, which we decided to ablate in the same sitting. Just took a biopsy also. And this is the endotracheal intubation. Now, this is 3 weeks post-op for this patient. You can see that there is beautiful scarring that is happening for this particular patient. But what you don't see is the esophagus doesn't seem to be there. And this is post-op 3 weeks. This is 6 weeks post-op, and then you can see how beautifully the laryngeal part is there. So these are the vocal cords, and I tried to palpate and see if there is some way that, if there is something that we could do to open up in this region for the esophagus, but it was just dense. This is 2 years post-op, dear colleagues. And here is this girl now studying law in Jaipur. What you see here is, this funny looking pit here is the colonic transposition. After we could achieve a good laryngeal inlet, these people, the surgical gastroenterology team did a fantastic job, brought the colon up, and this child is now 18 years old, doing very well, doing law. And how it has beautifully healed. And this is an amazing success story. And this is what the tool can achieve sometimes. Now, I will bring you to another patient who's a 42-year-old patient, presented with noisy breathing for 3 years. That's increased for the past 1 month. Some kind of a surgery was done on her in Egypt, the details of which we don't know. In 2019 in India, a laser supraglottoplasty was done. I'll play the FLP for you. This is the FLP for this patient. Okay, now let me pause. This is the piriform fossae. These are the pharyngoepiglottic folds. This entire region, there is no epiglottis. This whole region is scarified. Fortunately, below, I could have a glimpse of the true vocal cords. So as the protocol for all patients to do a CT, we did a CT scan of this patient, following which, this is the surgical video, again using an MLW wand. We started doing the surgical intervention. Slowly with setting of 7 and 3. I always use 7 and 3. Again, you can see how easy, delicately this wand works. You need to go, like you need to just press and go, press and go, press and go. You can't keep going on with like how you would do an adenoid procedure. You need to be very gentle of what you do. So you can see the tissue just getting melted away. Remember, this is a revision procedure. We are the third surgeons to do this. So I'll let the video play a little bit. And this is, if there is one thing that was told to me, that was to be very aggressive on one side and be very gentle on the other side. And that's exactly what I did. This side, if you can see, I was very aggressive. So here I've switched to the LW wand. The laryngeal inlet part, I was very careful using an MLW wand. Even here, I'm using a dab and go movement, dab and go movement. So those are the vocal cords there. Now this is the patient's first post-op week. What we did was we tracheostomized the patient and we put a stent. We also put an NG tube for this particular patient. This is post-op first week. And as you can see, this is the stent in situ. in the larynx, and the tracheostomy was there below. And but you can see how beautifully the mucosa starts to heal even in the first post-op week. Of course, it has a lot of secretions present. We fed the patient with the nasogastric tube. Now, post-op 6 weeks, we decided to decannulate her. Here we are decannulating her. You can see how beautifully it's mucosalized. So still has a little bit, the whole thing is now beautifully mucosalized. There is no breach there. And this is 4 weeks post decannulation. This is outpatient. Patient is absolutely asymptomatic. You can nicely see the vocal cords, mobile. And now it's almost been about 6 months. The patient has gone back to her native country and she's absolutely asymptomatic. Here's another patient operated earlier 3 times again. She's a 66-year-old patient with a bullous pemphigoid. And this is the pre-op FLP. You can see how this lesion is circumferentially. But luckily for us, this is the lesion. Very tempting, isn't it? It's very thin. The radiologist called me and said, "Doctor, this patient doesn't even have a stenosis." Well, she was very symptomatic. This is almost Cotton-Mayer classification 3. So we decided to take the endoscopic approach. But what is very important, I like to play this video again, but do you see the stenosis in this region, posterior glottic stenosis? So we need to be very careful with that. Because her voice is very good, we just didn't want to touch this area, because the moment we touch this area, you're opening a Pandora's box. So we decided to just operate in this area. This is the operative video using the MLW wand. Layer by layer, layer by layer. So you can see the true vocal cords now. Now look at the movement of the wand. I'm just going in, these are the, and now I'm injecting triamcinolone. And I think because this is an autoimmune condition, triamcinolone is very important. So there is a lot of literature out there, but each one of them, all of them saying it's a rare condition, isolated 1 case, 2 cases, novel stent design. And for me, the stent that I use is a regular nasopharyngeal airway. The best paper comes from Kishore Sandhu's group from Lausanne. This is in 2019, September. They finally opined that supraglottoplasty induced complications can be optimally treated endoscopically, like how we did. But more severe supraglottic cicatricial sequelae with posterior glottic involvement. Remember, I said do not touch the posterior glottic area, because if you touch that part, it's going to freeze and you're going to make things worse for us. And when they encounter this kind of a picture, they do an open as well as endoscopic procedure. But if they look at a transglottic stenosis, they do extended cricotracheal resection. Now, let's next proceed to other supraglottic pathologies. Here is a very interesting patient, a 20-year-old patient with postural OSA for whom an autopap was advised. Okay, nobody even bothered to do a scopy on the patient. And she was brought to me by the grandparent. And if you see a huge lesion just sitting on the supraglottic area. And we decided to operate this patient. We already knew what the diagnosis was because we did the CT. You will also know the moment I dissect it a little further. The coblation wand is so gentle that you don't even have to see all of these procedures. I'm just operating very next to the endotracheal tube, and the earlier procedures where we operated on the supraglottis, we were almost on the endotracheal tube. So airway, what do you call, fires are almost unheard of. So this patient was advanced CPAP and then BiPAP. Nobody even put a flexible scope to see what is going on, why a 20-year-old frail, thin girl should have OSA. And then the grandmother was so smart that the grandmother came to me and said, "Doctor, this patient, the moment she tilts to one side, she doesn't have any kind of snoring also," she says. So that made me actually put a scope and look inside, and this 20-year-old uh, female patient had this huge lesion there. Let me, for want of time, shift and push. So now you know what the diagnosis is. It has to be either two things. It either has to be, let me just, so now you know, it either has to be a lipoma or it has to be a schwannoma. So luckily for me, it was a lipoma. So this is more like a three-handed technique. So I use a suspension. I don't use a suspension laryngoscope. I use a Macintosh laryngoscope that my colleague designed. This is a regular tonsil Boyle Davis mouth gag that I'm using. And this, if you can see, is a Megel forceps that I'm using to create traction. So here you can see the nice plane. So traction is the key. You are operating with an angled scope. And with gentle traction, and so we sort of almost peel the entire lesion out. Whenever you do coblation procedures, the key is to actually use a lot of traction, and I wanted to release the tissue, the lesion from the uh, the medial wall of the piriform fossa. So I'm pulling it. You can see how beautifully it's coming out just with traction. This is the tonsil, not to confuse with the, so it's still attached. So once the whole thing is come off, so and then I ablate this whole thing. Once we ablate the whole thing, again, you can see the gentleness of this device. There's no charring anywhere. One unfortunate thing about the MLW wand is that you can't bend it. It's very, very fragile. So then remove the excise that whole mucosa there and put an NG tube, and then patient was fine post-op 7 day. Up to 7 days, we fed the patient through NG tube. Coming to neonates, there are a lot of patients that come like this. These patients actually, there are only two indications to operate these patients. One is if the child has apparent life-threatening events, or if there is failure to thrive for these patients. These are because most of us as ENTs keep getting called for stridor because the parents are so terrified. Please don't go on just because you know how to operate it, go ahead and operate. The only approved indications to operate a laryngomalacia is apparent life-threatening events and failure to thrive. That means the patient is losing weight, the baby is losing weight because all the energy is being spent on breathing. So the child just fails to gain any kind of weight. Now, there are many types of laryngeal. Here is an AP obstruction. You can see how the child's efforts are there because the child is so weak and frail. This is one kind. This is an anteroposterior kind of epiglottic collapse. Here is another child wherein the entire, supraglottis is lax and frail, and with every breath, the supraglottis just collapse, thereby increasing the work of breathing for these babies. So their commonest presentation is failure to thrive. Most of these kids, they don't present very early as soon as they are born, because the lung capacity also is very less. As the child grows older and as the child's lungs become stronger, these kids will try to develop more pressure, and when the child is feeding, these kids produce severe negative pressure, and that is when these borderline cases come into view. Now, this is another case of laryngomalacia. This is of particular interest to me. I just want you to, this is a typical laryngomalacia wherein there is mucosa which is falling forwards and causing, there's a little bit of tracheomalacia. Again, I don't want you to call anything as tracheomalacia. More than 50% of the lumen is blocked, only then you need to call it laryngomalacia. So in this typical case of laryngomalacia, you can see that the redundant mucosa on the arytenoids is falling forwards and causing obstruction there. There is a tiny bit of tracheomalacia there, but that's not why I want you to see this. Now, when we do direct laryngobronchoscopy, you can see three inlets that are happening. You see these, there is duplication of the right bronchus, this left main, and then there is a duplication of this right main bronchus into two. That's fine. The child is doing brilliantly well. There is no problem with that. But it's important that you know that such anomalies can exist, that you shouldn't be calling it a pathology. So if there is a neonate with apparent life-threatening events, you need to do a supraglottoplasty. Supraglottoplasty can be done with a CO2 laser. You can also do it with a laryngeal wand. This is a ProSize laryngeal wand. This is a 1-month-old baby with a apparent life-threatening event. So what I'm trying to do here is to create a raw area on the lingual surface of the epiglottis. So I'm just ablating the mucosa on the lingual surface of the epiglottis, so that once the glossoepiglottic fold is sort of is ablated and gets scarred, it will pull forward backward the epiglottis. As you can see, I'm just trying to create a scar there, and you see this tiny thin glossoepiglottic ligament. The next important step, if you can see, I'm almost operating underwater. So once that is done, once I create that, your limit of dissection is the pharyngoepiglottic fold or lateral glossoepiglottic fold. So once that is done, here I'm using now just the moment I ablate in this area, let me play this again. You can see how beautifully, like a flower, the entire supraglottis just opens up. There is no bleeding and there is no charring. And then similarly, you do the procedure on the other side. And once that is done, the entire larynx opens up and it beautifully heals. The mucosalization happens very nicely by the end of 1 week. And how it was before, and now you can see how beautifully the entire supraglottis opens up. When it comes to adult OSA, how it was happening in the kids, the epiglottis also closes in the same way. You can see the tremendous amount of intrathoracic pressure that would develop once this epiglottis collapses in an AP direction. There is another way that the epiglottis collapse in adult OSA, which is the lateral collapse, but that's beyond the, because for that we do a different kind of a procedure. And since it's beyond the scope of this discussion, I would just like you to concentrate on this particular type of collapse. You can see how, because of the laxity of the hyoepiglottic ligament, which is in the midline, the larynx is, the supraglottis is getting blocked because of the lax epiglottis. Now, how do we go about doing this? Now, you will have to use pediatric lap instruments. You will use the modified Macintosh laryngoscope suspended using the with a 30 degrees endoscope in one hand. Here I'm using the cutting pediatric lap instruments. These are not very expensive. You can borrow it from your gastroenterology colleagues. But the problem here is that there is a lot of bleeding. So what you do is, in order to prevent that, you ablate the mucosa, just suprahyoid part of the mucosa, you will have to ablate. If you observe, the mucosa on the laryngeal surface is tightly adherent to the cartilage, whereas the lingual surface of the epiglottis, it's very loose and redundant. So using an EVAC 70 wand, which is the workhorse, I'm going and ablating the lingual surface of the epiglottis. And this is a suspension Macintosh laryngoscope. Once I ablate the entire mucosa here, then it almost becomes avascular. The blood flow actually comes from this mucosa and also comes from the epiglottic branch of the lingual artery. You can see how this is suspended. And then once the entire mucosa is ablated, now I'm using the pediatric lap set. You can use the Karl Storz. I'm using the Ohm Surgical's ones, which is pretty good. The advantage of this instrument is that you can actually feel the hyoid bone, as you are cutting it, you essentially need to be suprahyoid. Now, at this point, while you are cutting this part, you will have a bleed. That means I have violated the epiglottic branch of the lingual artery. Now, at this point, I bring in my coblator again, and as you can see, the coblator is not able to control the bleed. It's an annoying bleed, but you can't come out, right? You can't let it be, because any bleeding from here just goes into the laryngeal inlet. The reason why this was happening like this is because the artery was coming parallel to the suction port of your precise or your what do you call evac 70 wand. This is the bleeder, and every time I'm trying to close it, the artery, which is a medium sized artery, is entering into the suction port, and I'm not able to coagulate it. So what you're supposed to do is ask your assistant or operating colleague to kink the wand, kink the suction, and then you can nicely ablate it, because the artery now comes out of the suction port of the MLW of the evac wand. Now, with this beautifully 360 degree rotating pediatric lap scissors, you can make a cut and then remove the suprahyoid epiglottis, which was causing a problem. Now, post-op, immediately, this is how it looks. There is pain, but not that much. This is 6 months post-op. The epiglottic patients are one of the most thankful patients. Immediately post-operatively, they improve, and their OSA sort of gets completely under control. Now, when it comes to bilateral abductor palsy, this is another area where coblation can be used. Now, the Dennis-Kashima procedure, which has always been used, but Dennis-Kashima procedure as a standalone procedure, well, in my hands, is not done great. So I have adapted the Riekers modification of the Kashima procedure, which basically involves taking out a bit of the false cord as well as the AE fold. So I'll just run you through these the technical aspects of it. This video is a little dull. So here we are. It's a bilateral abductor palsy. I am using, this is the vocal process, and I'm using the LW wand, and the posterior limit is the vocal process, and the inferior limit is the cricoid cartilage. And layer by layer, here's a patient. We didn't even have to do a trach on this patient. And layer by layer, we're going in, and you can see that there is no charring whatsoever. So this is on the false cord. Now we're going in. Do you see that I have the inferior limit? This is the vocal process. This is the inferior limit, which is the cricoid cartilage. So your limits are posteriorly vocal process, inferiorly cricoid cartilage. Laterally, you need to go up to the ala of the thyroid cartilage. It's only when you go up to that that you will need to, then you will get a very decent space. In immediate intra period, right, you will feel that you have done enough. But what happens if you don't go up to the ala of the thyroid cartilage is all this gets filled with granulation, and then the result is not very good. So these are the muscles. This is the thyroarytenoid muscle. If it's and this is the thyroarytenoid muscle. This is the cricoid cartilage again. Layer by layer, you go in, and that little bit of bleeder, you ablate with your in coag mode only. That's a little annoyance, but yes, don't press the coagulation pedal, because once you use the coagulation pedal, I showed you the depth is very high. So in coblation pedal itself, so this is the required cartilage, and now again layer by layer, you go in and ablate all the muscles. So this is the ala there. Okay, let me show you another video. This is the Riecker's modification. The Riecker's modification here in this patient, your patient is already tracheostomized. Now the advantage, if I use that suspension laryngoscope, is that you can also see beautifully the saccule, and you can see the larynx beautifully exposes itself. So again, the limits of dissection are the same. Inferiorly, cricoid cartilage, laterally thyroid lamella. So for want of time, let me just fast forward it. There's a little bit of bleeder there. We can beautifully come under control. You can actually see how the muscles, each one of them, your MLW wand is ablating, and there is no charring whatsoever. That's the same annoying vessel that comes in the that came in earlier. The beauty of this is that there is no charring whatsoever. Keep on ablating, keep on ablating. The direction should be posterolateral. Should be posterolateral. Harsha, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, Sagar, you're there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, is it not important that you need to get that vessel to make the procedure complete?
Yes, I'm coming there. I'm coming there. It's so I'm trying to expose the vessels on the thyroid ala, almost reach the thyroid ala. It's important that you see what you're cutting, and the coblation, that another advantage there is that as the saline is spilling on your field, you can see there how the single electrode of the MLW wand just nicely cuts, and that's the reason I just want to. So this is the whole thing. We're not done yet. Yeah, so almost reaching the ala. You can see the nice sheen that's coming into view of the thyroid ala. That is your lateral dissection. So you need to clear off all that. And there's always another annoying vessel that comes in there. Right, Sagar?
Totally agree. In other words, if you don't get the vessel, your procedure
is incomplete. Yes. So I'm just putting a little bit of a adrenaline soaked sheetinoid there. And this is the 3-month FLP of this patient. You can see how beautifully anteriorly the cord is there to preserve the voice. The patient is all the stridor and this thing is gone, and it beautifully mucosalizes. So there is it's just not about LW, it's about LW as well. Well, this is a little messy because this is a much bigger wand. but huge chunks of tissue can be very quick. So if you are short of time and if you want to take out large chunks of tissue, this is a procedure. You can use the LW wand. The result is still the same, but I somehow feel the delicacy of the delicateness of the entire procedure is lost with LW wand. So when it comes to polyps, you have these nice telangiectatic polyps that come into view. So just dabbing these once or twice will give you a fantastic result. And so there is not much of tissue penetration also. So keep on, go touch and go, touch and go, touch and go. So the entire procedure, because of the suction that is there, the whole thing just beautifully comes off of all the. So you just can, just snap it off with the scissors, or you can take a biopsy. And then you can just take a cup forceps and take it off. There are tissues, there are lesions like this, wherein I would use an MLW wand to be a little more precise. So, because you don't want a 4 millimeter huge footprint there, so it's better to use the MLW wand. So again, dab and go, dab and go. So the whole thing is just cleared off like that. Sometimes you have nice polyps with its own, you can see the nice lake that's forming here with its own blood supply. And using the MLW wand, just with a single hand technique, because it has suction, you can slowly peel it off the base. And here is the blood vessel that's coming in there. So there's a bleeder. So do not press the blue pedal here. Don't get frustrated. Just be patient. Keep going and pressing the yellow pedal. Keep at it. Keep at it. The whole thing will completely ablate. If you get restless during that time and press the blue pedal, and then we'll be at loss. Now slowly, the whole thing is ablated. And once the whole thing is just ablated, and you can see the blood vessel also feeding that thing, which got coagulated automatically. Then this little bit can be just trimmed off. And since that little bit of tag is there, you can use the coblation wand to just ablate that whole area. Since it's not a very hot device, you can also use it on the contralateral reactive lesion, whatever we call as a reactive lesion. And now, all of you would be surprised when I'm using the coblation with such big footprint. So literature basically says that at day 21, all the vocal cord lesions are 100% epithelialized. And this is of course from canine models. And based on the earlier data that I showed you, the depth is almost in microns. And we see all our patients in the post-operative period, because it's so gentle on the tissue, the mucosalization happens beautifully. It's finally roll-in subglottic stenosis. This is a patient with almost grade 3 subglottic stenosis using the Cotton-Mayer classification. You can use the LW wand here. It is brilliant. So again, dabbing technique, and then keep dabbing it, keep dabbing it. When do you stop? you will basically stop when you start seeing the rings of the tracheal rings, and this is when you stop. Well, my series are negligible compared to the series by, sorry, I think this slide is incomplete. They have done a beautiful paper by Ramandeep Virk, a dear friend of ours with Sandeep. They have a 67% decannulation rate with coblation. And we're not there yet. We'll definitely get there. Our numbers are far below. We are only at 20, but most of us have pretty decent. But the point is, they have great success in grade 2, grade 3 Cotton-Mayer classification. Grade 4, their success rate is 20%, as it is universally. So, dear friends, thank you very much. For your patient listening to the laryngeal applications. Now I would request Dr. Vidyasagar to take over.
Can you take some questions meanwhile?
Sure, absolutely.
Yes, sir. Dr. Vaidik was asking, does anyone use mitomycin C to prevent restenosis?
Okay, so mitomycin now almost we have given up because there is no strong evidence to show that mitomycin actually is of benefit. You can use multiple injections of Kenacort, which is triamcinolone, which scores far above the mitomycin C. Mitomycin C is supposed to have anti-fibroblastic properties, but it did not stand the test of time, nor did it stand the test of randomized control studies.
Jaiprakash Reddy, sir, you have some questions. I have unmuted you, sir. Can you please go ahead and ask?
Hello.
JP, hi.
Hello, boss.
Yeah.
See, I just want to ask you, what is the difference between this MLW1 and LW1?
Okay, so the length of both of them are same. Okay, it's 19 centimeters, but the thickness of the wand and the technology is a little different. Now, the LW wand is got a big foot pad. If I can go back to my presentation and show you, but it's about 3.8 millimeters in diameter, if I have to tell you precisely.
Okay.
The way you are supposed to use an LW wand and an MLW wand is very different.
Okay.
An LW wand, because of the foot that it has, you have to go dab and like how you use a mop. Okay. Whereas an LW wand, you have to dissect because the electrode is anterior. That is the cutting part. Whereas LW wand is for bigger lesions, MLW wand is for fine dissecting, fine cutting.
Okay, that's the only difference.
Difference, yes.
See, I have done about 10 to 12 Kashima procedures.
Okay.
But in my experience, it was doing fine for about 2 months to 3 months time. After that, the pseudomembrane was forming and the patient again developed stridor. Okay. So then following that, what I did bilateral Kashima.
Okay. Yeah,
but even then
on both sides.
Yeah, but the result was same after 6 months. 3-4 months, it was all right.
How many patients did that happen, JP?
Around 70 to 80%. I mean, see, I have done about 14 to 15 patients.
Okay.
Out of that, about 10 patients, it went wrong.
Well, my numbers are not huge. My numbers are less than 10. But none of my patients, when I used, earlier I used to use radio frequency needle. In those patients, definitely I see that, I used to see that. But the patients that I've started using the MLW wand, I did not see that happen. I have almost 2 years post-op follow for my patients, JP. Both
maybe see, I have seen your post-op result after about 3 months, or you said something. See, when you did that, when you showed the during primary surgery, the trough what was made was very huge. The
Yeah.
defect what you created. See, but at the end of 3 months, almost it has closed and a small gap was there.
Correct.
So the
Agreed.
gap that is remaining, I think that would suffice for a people who are not actively, not manual laborers or hardworking people. I think that small defect what is created would suffice for females who are sedentary workers or almost in sitting job. But
Possibly,
for people
ma'am.
who are, yeah, see, that is what my experience is that. See, one
Okay.
lady
So it's a
there,
valid point,
Yeah.
JP, valid point.
Yeah.
But
See-
it's always a cutoff. It's always a trade-off between good voice and breathing, isn't it? So
Yes, correct.
the more you cut, the more you are losing. And hence now all the reinnervation procedures are coming, but with phrenic reinnervation and phrenic nerve reinnervation, where the ansa cervicalis reinnervation procedures have come into play for the bilateral abductor palsy. But those also, the success, it's still very early for them for us to totally abandon modified Kashima and Kashima. But
No,
you are very
no.
correct. The patient who is very happy breathing is unhappy about his voice, and the patient who is happy about the voice is unhappy about his breathing.
But we are bothered about breathing.
True, but the patients who come back and tell us that the breathing is fantastic, my voice is bad, is what they say. Especially the women. So yeah, as you said, it's an absolute trade-off. You cannot get that perfect sweet spot.
Correct. But in your opinion, so do you still want to do Kashima procedure, or you want to combine with some partial arytenoidectomy?
The moment you start doing arytenoidectomy, the aspiration sets in, JP.
Yes.
The moment you do
arytenoidectomy,
the moment you touch go beyond the vocal process, the aspiration sets in. So in my hands, I think arytenoidectomy has been associated with aspiration, so I've completely given up. If the patient is happy with the Kashima, I would do a Kashima. Otherwise, I would probably send him to Dr. Menon for a ANSA reinnervation procedure.
Yeah, I think what I feel is even though there is some chance of pseudomembrane formation and patient is not all that very happy with Kashima procedure, I think it's a very good idea to do Kashima procedure either unilateral or bilateral in your patient. If the patient is doing with that, it's okay because it's not a very destructive procedure.
Correct.
So you can always do arytenoidectomy at a later date if the patient is not doing well with the Kashima procedure. See, that is what I felt, because after doing this procedure, this 7 to 8 patients required revision on the opposite side, or I have to send the patient to some other center. Okay. So with that, this one, I think the procedure what you done, same thing I did in my patient also. Okay. But some patients had pseudomembrane formation. That's what my observation was. I think it's a good take-home message that if you can get away with Kashima, it's nothing like that.
Sure, JP. Point taken.
Thank you.
Yes, Harsha. I think is Sagar ready, or there are more questions?
There are more questions, but we'll take after the end of the discussion, sir.
Sure, man. Sure.
Srinivas.
Yes, Sagar.
I'm going to play the second fiddle today. If you have a lot more questions and if you want to do that, because I think my talk today is going to be coblation in OSA, which I feel majority of the participants would have listened to our talk somehow or other. So
doesn't matter, man. It's always better to, well, I would leave it to Harsha, but I think more the better, nobody's an expert. Positive reinforcement, there's nothing wrong in, you can probably go fast.
Yeah.
You can go ahead, sir. We don't have any time constraints today.
Okay, then. So I will start with my, I think myself and Srinivas were discussing how to go about. So on the other day, the class 1, we had a very good discussion on ENT potpourri, where coblation and its uses were discussed on various facial lesions like hemangiomas, nasal mosses, nasopharyngeal hemangiomas, lymphomas, oral vascular malformations, and we also discussed on the tongue-based lesions, tongue lesions. So we had discussed all those things on the other day. Even the hello. Yeah. So even the pediatric cystic lesions. So we discussed all those things on the class 1 of coblation in ENT. So today we are going to talk on one is the laryngeal applications and with the coblation, and I think Srinivas has beautifully shown majority of the cases. So I don't want to show them again. So in view of time, I'm just going to limit myself to coblation in sleep apnea. So at the outset, I want to thank Sri Harsha and his foundation for doing this wonderful webinars. And I also want to thank Dr. Srinivas Kishore for setting up the stage very nicely. Srinivas, is my sound audible? Sri Harsha, Srinivas?
Yes, man, perfectly.
Okay. So at any point, if you feel I'm crossing the time, or if you feel like I'm going about, just let me know so that I'll cut short, because majority of the thing, I think our delegates would have gone. Or
doesn't matter, Sagar.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter, man. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay then. So today I'm going to limit myself with coblation and its application in OSA. So as you all know, obstructive sleep apnea has collapsibility in multiple levels. That is multi-level collapse. That is the type of obstruction, whether it is a static obstruction or a dynamic obstruction, can happen in multiple levels. That is, it can happen at the level of the nose, velopharynx, oropharynx, hypopharynx, and in the laryngopharynx. So I'm going to show some of the uses of coblation and the various types of wands that are used in various levels of obstruction in OSA. So this is the first and foremost application that I want to show. So this is the Reflex 45 wand. I think you all can see the Reflex 45 wand that is being used in reduction of the turbinate hypertrophy that plays a major role in the nasal obstruction in the patients with obstructive sleep apnea. So what we do here is we use this Reflex 45 wand, which is having 3 markings. So you can do this turbinate reduction with 2 or 3 types of wand. One is the Reflex 45 wand. The other one is the turbinator wand that I think at the end Dr. Srinivas may try to show them. But what we do essentially in this procedure is we first infiltrate the turbinate with saline or with xylocaine with adrenaline, depending on whether you are doing with GA or local. And then we insert until the 3rd mark all the way inside. One important thing you need to do is we have to do it under endoscopic guidance to make sure that this wand does not penetrate the mucosa through and through. And while you are inserting it, you have to make sure that it is in the submuc, or it is in the turbinate soft tissue, so that it doesn't penetrate through and through, it doesn't come out. And then what we do, we press the pedal, ablation pedal. So it works in the concept of resistive heating, wherein the settings will be set at 4 and 2. The 4 will be for ablation and 2 for coagulation. And then we press the pedal for approximately 10 seconds for each spot. That is, as I said before, there are 3 markings, 1, 2, and 1 more will be coming in the distally. That will be the 3 markings. So at each marking, we insert and press for 10 seconds, and then we gradually withdraw until the 2nd marking, and then again we start to compress the ablation pedal for 10 seconds, and then we come to the third marking or the distal one, and then we do the same. Not just that, we also pass this in multiple directions. First we go perpendicularly downwards, and then we go upwards like an arc. We rotate it upwards until we kind of ablate it. I do it at least in 3 passes, and at the end of third pass, you would notice beautiful shrinkage of the turbinate. But the actual turbinate reduction, you would be noticing in at least, it will start to notice in 2 weeks. By at least 4 weeks, you will see a significant reduction, and by 6 weeks, you will see a wonderful reduction of the inferior turbinate. You can also do the same thing, or you can do a modified turbinoplasty with the turbinator wand. But for the want of time, I'll proceed with the next level. So the next level that I'm going to show is the velopharynx. Therein, on the lateral wall, you can get this bands. These bands may come and approximate each other, and this may be hypertrophy. And these bands are nothing but prominent salpingopharyngeal folds. And use this, what the wand we use is, we use this SP wand. So this is again a wand which has both irrigation as well as it also works with the resistive heating principle. Therein again the settings would be 4 and 5, and I usually may increase it to 5 and 3. 4 and 2, and I usually increase it to 5 and 3 at the max. But the care should be taken. So this is so I insert it into the salpingopharyngeal fold, but the care should be noted that we don't go all the way lateral, because if you go much lateral, you can have the internal carotid artery. So you repeat the same thing on the opposite side, and you get the adequate shrinkage. But sometimes you may get a very much hypertrophied salpingopharyngeal fold. Like if you go by Vikas's grading, there are grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this one I would say is like the maximum, that is grade 4. So in these instances, we can use this EVAC 71, and for which I usually do it most likely under general anesthesia, and I pass this EVAC 71 transorally. I bend this EVAC 71 approximately 30 to 40 degrees, and I pass a nasal endoscope through the nasal cavity, and I visualize the salpingopharyngeal fold, and I try to even ablate the medial portion of the salpingopharyngeal fold. Care is taken that there is always a saline flow while you are doing this ablation. You should not be very much aggressive to go to the lateral wall, otherwise you can cause scarring of the eustachian tube orifice, and you can cause middle ear pathologies. So you have to limit yourself only to the prominent salpingopharyngeal folds. But I just wanted to let you know that even if you expose the cartilage there, nothing happens. It just scars off, and it does not cause much impact on the middle ear. But if you go to the lateral wall, then is the time you can get some impact. So we do the same thing on the opposite side. For the want of time, I'm just fast forwarding it. So we do the same thing on the opposite side. So again, under the endoscopic visualization, we do the same thing on the opposite side. And believe me or not, with this technique, this prominent salpingopharyngeal fold gets shrunk, especially if you see in the postoperative period in second week, you can see a very good healed salpingopharyngeal fold region. But by 4th week, you get a very good scarring. So the next problem that you get very commonly in OSA patients is the prominent adenoid tissue. Herein, you are seeing an adult patient with the adenoid tissue. For a pediatric patients, we generally use a EVAC 71. But in adult patients, you can notice a lot of fibrosis, and whenever there is a lot more fibrosis, it becomes a little more difficult to ablate it with the regular wand. In these instances, we use this special wand This is nothing but a head and neck wand. You can see how there is a tip that comes out, that is the active wand, with which you can dig into the adenoid tissue and you can scoop out a little bit of adenoid tissue if in case you want. And furthermore, if you want, you can also coagulate it if there is any bleeding there. So like that, we can go from the basis sphenoid region all the way to the lateral wall. And we do the same thing on the opposite side. We can go up to the basis sphenoid and we go to the posterior wall to the pharyngobasilar fascia. And once again, you have to respect the Eustachian tube orifice, but you can go even behind the torus tuberous to the fossa of Rosenmuller, and you can even ablate the adenoid tissue completely, and thereby you can remove this adenoid tissue. So this is the endoscopic view, how it looks in the other way. Another way to use the coblation is you can combine it with the debrider, especially in the adult patients, wherein let's say you have planned for a multi-level procedure and you want to preserve the wand. You don't want to use too many wands, because by just using on the adult fibrotic adenoid tissue, there is a chance that your wand may get off with using only on the adenoid tissue, and you may not have the wand for your rest of the palatal work or for the tongue-based work. In these cases, if you want to preserve the longevity of the wand, what you can do is you can do the debrider technique, and you can debride off the adenoid tissue until you go to the pharyngobasilar fascia, and then you can combine your coblator. You can take your EVAC 71 and you can use an ablation technique, wherein I call this as combined debrider and coablation technique. So it becomes a Kodak procedure. So you can also do this. If you have the luxury of using a two wand, then you can use a separate EVAC 70 wand for addressing the adenoid, and then you can use another wand for your rest of the multi-level procedure. But in case you have an adult patient wherein you have a prominent adult adenoid tissue like this, and in case you want to preserve the wand for your rest of the procedure, then you can use this technique of Kodak procedure. But on the contrary, if you have a pediatric patient only with the adenoid hypertrophy, then you can use only your EVAC 71 directly on the adenoid tissue. I think we have shown multiple times how we do this procedure, how we ablate the adenoid tissue. So I'm just going to quickly move aside, wherein we have the EVAC 71 with the setting of 7 and 3, and we can even increase it to a setting of 8 and 4, 8 being for ablation and 4 for coagulation. And gently we try to use the plasma generator to ablate the adenoid tissue. We complete it on one side and then we go to the opposite side. And then we do the same procedure on the opposite side, and we irrigate copiously so that we get a good ablation during this procedure. So this is how a EVAC 71 is used for doing a good adenoidectomy. So the next procedure that I'm going to show, the use of coblation is for your palatal procedures. So here I'm going to show you a drug-induced sleep endoscopy that shows a lateral collapse at the level of the velopharynx. So this is the lateral collapse. I think Dr. Vijay Krishnan was a moderator for this workshop that we were performing. So herein, I'm just going to start the procedure, and I'm going to show how we do it for a tonsillectomy also with the EVAC 71, and then we can use it for the expansion sphincter pharyngeal plasty later on. So again, the wand of choice for the tonsillectomy is, of course, a EVAC 70. You should be seeing how I can go into the capsule and I maintain a plane. You can see that there is a beautiful loose areolar tissue that is maintained over the muscles of the tonsillar bed, over the superior constrictor muscles as well as over the posterior pillar muscle, that is the palatopharyngeus muscle. So this is we do the tonsillectomy also, whether it is a pediatric patient or if it is an adult patient also. Especially in a patient with the sleep apnea, the preservation of the palatopharyngeus muscle is of even more importance. So that is why we resort to the coblation, wherein we can beautifully preserve a layer of loose areolar tissue over the muscle, and thereby we can just dissect out only the tonsillar tissue. And again, this procedure can be done from superior pole to inferior pole or from the inferior pole to superior pole. And again, I think we have shown in multiple workshops how to do a tonsillectomy using a EVAC 70 wand. The another wand that we may use for adenoidectomy apart from EVAC 70 is the Process Max wand. I think I may show in one of the videos in following. So we do this, you can see how beautifully the entire tonsillectomy bed is completely preserved with the fascia over it. And then we go over to the opposite side. And here we are doing from the inferior to superior pole technique. This is like an open book approach, wherein we start from the inferior pole and then we go to the superior pole. So again, the importance is to identify the capsule and you try to preserve a facial plane over the tonsillar bed muscle, that is the superior constrictor, middle constrictor, and the palatopharyngeus muscle. So as you go posteriorly, you will be seeing the fascia being preserved over the palatopharyngeus muscle. And if at all there is any blood ooze there, you can use the coagulation wand, coagulation pedal. The blue pedal is the coagulation pedal and the yellow pedal is the ablation pedal. So this is how we maintain a small tissue plane space between the tonsillar tissue as well as the wand, so that the plasma will form between the wand and the tonsillar tissue, and that does the ablation. So if you want a good ablation to happen, you need to maintain a millimeter or two space between the tonsillar tissue and the wand. And you can use the curve or arcade of the wand itself to do a counter traction. So you need a traction and a counter traction, and the curve of the wand itself will be used as a counter traction to complete the procedure. So now here we have completed the tonsillectomy, and then we proceed with the expansion sphincter pharyngoplasty. So what we do with the expansion sphincter pharyngoplasty, we first mark the pterygoid hamulus area and then we infiltrate. So essentially in this procedure, what we do, we want to elevate the palatopharyngeus muscle approximately in the division between the upper 2/3 and lower 1/3. We divide the palatopharyngeus muscle and we pull the palatopharyngeus muscle through a tunnel and we suture it to a pterygoid hamulus periosteum. But for that to do, we need to make 2 incisions on either side of the posterior pillar muscle, that is the palatopharyngeus muscle. You may use a radiofrequency or you may use even a monopolar or coblation. In my hands, you can see how beautifully a coblation helps in creating a division between the palatopharyngeus muscle and the superior constrictor muscle. So you can see how I'm trying to use the coblator itself to divide the muscle and elevate it from the posterior pillar bed mucosa. So first I make the incision laterally, and then I go and make a medial incision like this. So this is the medial incision, and I make a vertical medial incision, and this muscle that I'm holding with the forceps is the bulk of the palatopharyngeus muscle. So the most important thing is you have to preserve the mucosa in the posterior pillar muscle, posterior pillar area, and you should not do any button. You can divide the posterior pillar muscle from the junction of the upper 2/3 to the lower 1/3, and that can also be done with the help of your EVAC 70 wand itself. And if there is any ooze, you can use a hovering technique to control it, or you can use a coagulation mode. So gradually you elevate off this posterior pillar muscle, that is the palatopharyngeus muscle, but you cannot elevate all the way. You have to elevate it up to the upper third of the upper pole of the tonsillar pillar pole, and then you stop there, and then you create a tunnel from the pterygoid hamulus periosteum area to the superior pole of the tonsillar bed, and you pass a 2-0 vicryl, and then you take a figure of 8 suturing over the palatopharyngeus muscle. So you pass it at least 3 or 4 times so that you have a good grip over the palatopharyngeus muscle, and then you pass it through the tunnel that you have created to the pterygoid hamulus area, and then you take a bite to the pterygoid hamulus periosteum, and you suture it and tie the knot. While you tie the knot, you will be noticing how the posterior pillar muscle gets pulled laterally, and thereby it pulls a vector in the lateral dimension. Thereby it opens up the velopharynx and the oropharynx in the lateral dimension. So you do the same procedure on the opposite side as well. So here I'm going to the opposite side. I'm making the lateral incision. While making the lateral incision, you should take precaution not to injure the glossopharyngeal nerve and also the tonsillar artery. And then I come to the distal end. I divide the palatopharyngeus muscle at the junction of the upper 2/3 and lower 1/3, and then I slowly elevate it off from the mucosa, preserving the mucosa of the posterior pillar, and then I elevate it, making sure that there is a good mucosal attachment to the palatopharyngeus muscle, so that when I pull the palatopharyngeus in the lateral direction, it pulls open the velopharynx in the lateral dimension. So now I'm making a small cut, and then I'm inserting a right angled forceps, and I create a tunnel, and then I pass the suture, take a figure of 8 stitch, and then I come back, suture it to the pterygoid hamulus periosteum and tie it. So once I do this suturing, if I pass my endoscope into the velopharynx, I can see that it opens up very nicely in the lateral dimension, and it opens up especially for the patients with OSA with the lateral collapse in the velopharynx. This is a wonderful technique of choice wherein a patient plays an important role. So coming down, we can also use the coblation for the other palatal procedures like zeta palatoplasty or for uvulopalatal flap, etc. But for the want of time, I'm just going to go ahead and show the next level, that is the tongue base. So for the tongue base, if you have a static obstruction like in the form of a lingual tonsils like this is the place where your coblation works beautifully. So when not only for the lingual tonsils, even for a tongue base collapse that you see in your drug-induced sleep endoscopy, you can use your coblation wherein you can ablate the tongue-based tissue millimeter by millimeter with the help of your EVAC 70 wand. So what we do in this case is we mark the tongue base from the circumvallate papillae in a wedge-shaped area, wherein we limit our excision with the coblation, limiting to the 1.5 centimeter on either side of the midline behind the circumvallate papillae. Since it happened to be a partial collapse at the level of the tongue base, this alone would be sufficient. When patient with the drug-induced endoscopy with a complete collapse like this. This is the drug-induced sleep endoscopy, wherein you have a combination of a muscular and a lymphoid tongue base with a complete tongue base obstruction like this. Then you have to do an aggressive procedure, wherein again the patient is kept in a supine position, and we use a tongue blade one size less than what we traditionally use for your tonsillectomy, and then we keep a good pack, and then we use a 45-degree endoscope and we visualize the posterior tongue base. We see the foramen cecum, and once again, as I said, we mark the area behind the circumvallate papillae and we try to go for ablation. But here, instead of using a EVAC 70 wand, I am using a Precise Max wand. This is a very aggressive wand wherein you have a irrigation channel that is going to flow from the anterior aspect, and it will fall with the gravity over the active electrode, so that you can notice a lot more ablation to happen rather than what you see with the EVAC 70 wand. In EVAC 70 wand, the irrigation port will be coming all around the wand. But with the Precise Max wand, you will see that irrigation channel is seeing over the anterior aspect. So the gravity position or in the supine position, this saline tends to fall over the wand, and thereby your ablation happens even more effectively. So this is much more aggressive wand to use it for a muscular and a lymphoid tongue base, wherein you need to do a much more aggressive procedure. So first I finish off the ablation, the anterior part of the posterior tongue base, and then on one side, and then I go to the opposite side, to the midline, and then I go to the opposite side, so that I will have adequate exposure, so that in the event there is any bleeding or oozing that happens, my exposure is adequate, so that I will be able to coagulate any bleeding if it happens. So because there was also a secondary epiglottic collapse, I also tried to use the wand to debride off the mucosa over the epiglottis, so that it forms glossoepiglottoplexy. It will be very useful for your secondary epiglottic collapse. So as you see that as I have completed on one side and then crossed over to midline, and then I am going to the other side, just in case, if in case I get any bleeding, like what I'm about to show you here, because I have an adequate exposure, I can immediately use the same wand in a coagulation mode, and I can keep a contact mode. So far I was using a near contact mode, but for doing a ablation or a coagulation, I go for a contact mode, and I keep it in the contact mode for at least 4 seconds, and until I achieve a hemostasis, I do this again and again, provided it is a capillary ooze or a venous ooze. If it is an arterial ooze of medium size, then I would rather go for a bipolar technique. Like this, I get a good hemostasis, and then I go down to the vallicula, and then I do the ablation in the vallicular region, and I complete my tongue base ablation procedure. So as I have shown many of these procedures before, for the want of time, I'm just going to fast forward it. And this is how it looks at the end of your procedure. You can see how bulky it was before, and you can see how roomy it is at the end of the procedure of your tongue glaze ablation. So we don't have to always use the coblator in the ablation mode. We can also do an excision of the tongue base tissue. That we can do it like this. We can mark a wedge-shaped area in the tongue base behind the circumvallate papilla, wherein your lingual vessels and the hypoglossal nerves are much lateral, that is approximately 1.5 centimeter from the midline. And as you go posteriorly, it is even more posterior. It will be approximately 1.75 or 2 centimeter when you go a lot more dorsally. So you can mark a segment like this, and you can excise the tongue base like this. So like a big tongue chunk base can be excised it like this. So the same thing can be also done for a static obstruction of a patient, wherein you can have a lingual thyroid that is causing a secondary epiglottic collapse. This is a static obstruction at the level of the tongue base with causing a secondary epiglottic collapse. And you can do the same thing with the help of your coblator, wherein you can mark an incision around the lingual thyroid, and then you also leave a little bit of muscular tissue to attach to the lesion, so that in case you want to hold the lesion with your Alice forceps, you can hold it, and this will create a traction and a counter traction, and thereby you can use the coblator in the ablation mode, and thereby you can go all around the lesion, and you can excise the lesion in toto. And in these kind of extensive lesions, I keep the patient intubated postoperatively for a day 1, and then I do a flexible endoscopy and check whether the tongue base is healed without any bleeding and there is no edema, and then I extubate them, and then I serially follow them in the postoperative period with the endoscopy, and you can see a beautiful scar tissue that forms in these patients, especially in the post-op day 3. So coming to the epiglottic collapse that you can see in patients, I think first we do a interventional DISE and make sure that this is a primary epiglottic pathology and not because of a lateral pharyngeal collapse. We make sure that this collapse is a primary collapse, and then we address the epiglottic collapse. So this epiglottic procedure can also be done with the help of your coblator. But to show how a coblator helps, I think maybe Srinivas would have shown it because I joined late. I don't know whether he has shown the laryngomalacia procedures where a coblator is so effective. So you can use a coblator wherein you can use either a MLW wand or even a EVAC 70 wand. You can ablate the aryepiglottic folds like how I am showing here. And then you can go to the opposite side and you can do the same ablation. And then the next important thing you use is you use the EVAC 70 wand and you ablate the mucosa over the epiglottis like this. So by which you coagulate the vessels that feeds this suprahyoid epiglottis. I'm pretty sure that Srinivas might have addressed this laryngomalacia, but for showing you how epiglottis can be dealt with the coblator, I'm showing this procedure wherein the mucosa gets ablated or with your coblator, and you can use your pediatric laryngeal instruments and you can excise and do a suprahyoid epiglottomy, or what you call it as a supraglottoplasty, and you can do a very good procedure. This same technique can be used in adult patients also, and you can do a good procedure for addressing your epiglottis. So I think I can go on and on with my coblation and OSA, but for the want of time, I think I have crossed more than half an hour. I'm going to end here. And if you have any questions, I'll take it. Or if you want me to show other procedures in larynx or elsewhere, I can even continue. But I think for the want of time, I'm ending here. Srinivas?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, Srinivas and Shriyarsa, yeah. I think I'm going to end here. And if you want me to show more, I can show more. But
I don't know. I think why don't we just take questions now?
Yeah.
Because it's almost 10 o'clock and we've been at it for almost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Let's take questions and then we'll take it from there.
Sure thing, sure thing.
Yeah. Harsha?
Yes, sir. Yes, I'm here, sir.
Yeah.
During Vidyasagar sir's talk, there were few questions where Dr. Vaidik was asking during the base of tongue surgery, how do you mark the lingual artery?
Yeah. So for the want of time, I was rushing it, but I think we have, I'll tell you the course of lingual artery, how it goes into the tongue base. So if you have seen that this is the tongue base, if you want, I can show a slide, but just approximately I'll show with the fingers. You just think that this is your tongue base. So usually the lingual artery comes from the back, and from the posterior tongue base, it ascends and it enters into the tongue substance and it traverses. As it traverses anteriorly, it's approximately at the level of the foramen cecum. It is 1.5 centimeter from the midline. So your lingual artery traverses 1.5 centimeter on either side of the midline. But when it comes to the anterior part, it comes even more closer. It will be approximately 1 centimeter in the midline, and then it comes to the tip. So in the initial periods, what we used to do, we used to mark the course of this lingual artery with the help of a Doppler. So at least for my first few cases, at least for 10 patients, we used to mark the course of this lingual artery with the help of the Doppler. But with the experience, when we started to do more of procedures, we found that a wedge that is created, that is approximately 1.5 centimeter from the foramen cecum in either sides, and gradually, if you create a wedge on lateral side, you do not come across this lingual artery. If at all you come across, you will get a twigs or capillaries or branches from the profunda lingual artery, which is again a branch of the lingual artery. And only if you go into the tongue base in the middle third or in the anterior third, you will be closely proximal to the lingual artery. But when you're doing the coblation itself, still on the OT, you can use your Doppler and you can see whether you're going close to the lingual artery or not. So that is the way you can do it. Does it answer it, Srinivas and Harsha?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Next question.
That was the only question, sir, from your talk.
Okay.
There was from Dr. Srinivas Kishore's talk, there was one comment by Dr. Jayasinghe. I find it very difficult to control the bleeder in Kashima.
Okay. So the idea is to go layer by layer. And yes, there will be bleeding. There is no doubt about it. But I think with adequate exposure and going layer by layer, first, the thing is try to expose your limit posteriorly and then inferiorly and then go laterally. So if you sort of follow that basic principle, you will get a lot of space so that you are not cramped for space to control any kind of bleeding.
Yes. Dr. Alok Mondal was asking, can you show us the picture of your modified laryngoscope?
I think, let me see if I have that at this point, but wait, I may have it. Why don't I share it with you tomorrow for sure, Harsha?
Yes, sir.
I can take a separate picture and I will both the attachments with the suspension as well as with the plant saucers. It can attach to both the stands. I will send it to you for sure.
Sir, can you go through the various types of wands which you are talking about?
So first, what I will do is I will share with you the PDF that I told you about. Okay.
It can be uploaded in the Zoom app itself, sir. If you can see the file.
You can probably help me with that. Wait, let me just stop sharing. Wait, how do I go to this? Go to my presentation. Let's see. Yeah. Can you see this one?
Yes, yes.
Oh, why is it? Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, you have to zoom it up little.
Little more.
Zoom.
Zoom more. Wait. Are you doing it for me?
No, I have not done, sir. Wait.
It just disappeared.
When to end up the slide?
Yeah. So, okay. So,
put it in the.
Yeah, I approved it. Okay. So, Harsha, are you doing something? Yeah.
Yes,
it's come.
Yes.
Yeah. So here you can actually see. Oh, there is zoom in. Yeah. So here is every single procedure with how much you have to use, and if you can just reduce it a little bit, then I think we can. Harsha, can you just yes? So here there is default setting, and then there is surgeon's preference as well. So initially it is better to go with default setting, and this is a chart I think all of you should have in the operating room. The last one, the head and neck wand, does not exist anymore. It's taken off the shelf, but all the other wands are there. So I think this is does this help, Harsha?
Yes, sir. Yes. I'll share the link to the participants anyway.
Yes, absolutely, man. So this is something that you could use, and this is something that's there in our OT, which is stuck there. So it also tells you how much saline to take, how much to keep, what is the default setting of every wand.
Dr. Sachdeva is asking how much length of turbinator, any precautions required during the coblation?
What precautions in terms of airway fire? In terms of airway fire or precaution? Yes. So let me tell you that this is a bipolar radio frequency device. So if somebody has a, a pacemaker in the heart, you need to be little careful. Or, if they have probably a hypoglossal nerve implant, they need to be little careful. But then other than that, I don't think there should be a problem. And in terms of airway fire precautions, this can be used on the endotracheal tube. Absolutely nothing. If you would have seen some of the videos that I've done, I've actually put my wand on the endotracheal tube. So there's absolutely no chance of damage to the endotracheal tube or question of airway fire.
Yes. I think most of the questions have been.
Yeah, I think answered. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Sagar. Thank you very much, Harsha.
I think there is one question they have asked Mahesh Babu. Lingual thyroid surgery, how do you avoid recurrence? If in case you you excise the entire lesion completely, then you will not have any recurrence. So you have to.
Yeah, but they need to treat the root cause of the problem, which is reflux and postnasal drip.
It is lingual thyroid, not.
Oh, lingual thyroid, is it? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree what you're saying. Okay, guys, then.
Thank you.
I think thank you very much, and good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Sri Harsha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vidyasagar sir and Srinivas Kishore sir, for two excellent talks in coagulation and ENT. I think we have covered almost all the maximum spectrum of coagulation uses in various subspecialties on ENT. I mean, we had a beautiful video demonstration, step by step. Even though we had little time constraints in the first session, I think we had made it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Harsha.
Thank you, sir.
And we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, we'll end the webinar.
Sure.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.